All right, welcome everyone to Unsafe Space Book Club. We are on a different URL for this book club than we intended to be. We've been having some trouble live streaming with Zoom lately, so apologize for that. But we are here to discuss the management of savagery. We'll probably wait around for a couple minutes and just chat while people jump into the stream because Carrie is, I think, is going over to the other stream telling people what the new URL is. But thank you all for joining. Let me see if I can bring everyone's video up. Okay, there's everyone. Is everyone unmuted? Can you guys speak?
Hello,
Yes.
hello.
There we
Can you hear
go.
me? Okay.
Hi.
So here's what I'll do while we're waiting for people. Tamara, who I think we can hear you right now. Can we hear you, Tamara?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I had
You
to switch
are.
computers. I had to try. I was trying not to kick my husband off his.
Well, Tamara, you have earned the prize of being the person who has been. I think you've been at every single book club from day one, and you always have good insight. So,
And by the way, Tamara was there before it was even called the Unsafe Space Book Club, back when it was just my pet project. And
Yep.
she's been there from day one.
Yes. So, Tamara, we're going to send you a Unsafe Space mug,
Thank
which
you.
I would show. But see, I think Carrie has your address,
Yes.
Yeah.
so we'll
I
send
do
it to
now.
you.
I was
But
here last week.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
finally got to meet
Here's
her in
the mug.
person.
This is what you get for participating in Unsafe Space Book Club as diligently as Tamara. So
I already have one of your shirts.
good. So anyway, welcome. I am going to actually, Carrie, can you kick off the discussion while I go and change the live stream link on our website?
Yes, I can.
During this. So I'll let you guys start talking about the book. Again, it's Management of Savagery by Max Blumenthal. And go.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you guys for joining us today. I was wondering how many people would show up for this one, because I heard in the discussion in our Facebook group that some people didn't like the book or they quit reading it. And so, it was hard to get through. There's a lot of facts and figures and names. And at some point I just gave up on trying to remember who's who and just started trying to get an overall picture of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really appreciate you guys coming here to talk about it with us. Why don't we because I see some new faces today too, I think. Why don't we just start off with what we usually do, like some general impressions of the book or opinions on the book, or as someone said before we started, maybe you have a different impression on the book than you do the author. Would anyone like to start?
I'll start.
Hi, is that Bethany?
So,
Yes.
is
Great.
really happy. Just so you know, I actually worked in a bureaucratic system. I worked for the Department of Social Health Services, and I worked with the most vulnerable families that were receiving government funding. And so, I working in a bureaucratic system, like the last day of work I had was December 12th of 2019. I came down with a really terrible headache. Hasn't gone away, and doctors don't know why, but I do think part of it was just the stressor of working in a system that has what I call a lot of death speak. And so I've listened to the best of my ability on Audible, the management of savagery. And what was the other part of the question?
What was your general impression of the
that?
book? Did you enjoy it, or what did you think about the process of reading it?
Well, actually, I think I'd probably enjoy scraping my face down a sidewalk more than I would this book. But I feel like it's really, really important to stand. It's like, because I think movies about what happened in the 1980s and 1960s are coming out and have been. And I just think people, it's really good it's kind of like you either could take the red pill or the blue pill. And then once you take the blue pill, you can't really ever go back. And I feel like understanding patterns of actions taken by people who present one way and are actually a way, like it's very disheartening and many times unless you have like a specific faith practice that you're engaged in, it can be very, it's like America has so many beautiful people that inhabit it, and so do other countries. Ours were manipulating, and it on one end, my heart is aching, and at the other end, there's a sense of hope too, because there's so many good people that are on the ground, But like when it comes to the powers that be, it kind of, in some respects, like I only had to take it in bits and pieces, seeing how I did work in the bureaucratic system, because it's so much and it does feel so disheartening. And then I just have to remember, but then when I talk with my family members and I spend time with my friends, and then I Unsafe Space, which has been so good for me, it's like questioning is so, so important.
It sounds like the book kind of, what you're saying is that it's sort of disheartening to read about these powerful machinations that are happening in the background that we're not even privy to, but you're saying, yeah.
And then, that one statement by Mario Salvo, he was like a activist on college campuses in the 1960s. He talks about once you just have to come to a place where you're just so sick, you can't even take part. You can't even minusculely take part. You have to put your body upon the gears, upon the, and he has this beautiful way of speaking, like you need to, like once you understand or have an eye or just your mind is open to these things, you just can't take part. And so I think Unsafe Space is a great way for me at this time, because I can't even look at a computer screen at this time. But when I do, it's really painful for my eyes. And so, but this for me at this time, this is what I can do to take part, or put my body upon the gears, upon the, and just have those one-on-one conversations with other people. And, this is, for me, Unsafe Space is the foundation for being able to understand what's going on, to hear what other people have to say, and really listen without a plan of what to say next, practicing that being present with other people who are wanting to learn.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in on mine.
What do you think, Carrie? Yeah.
I liked reading it. I mean, like Bethany said, scraping your face on the pavement might be more enjoyable.
Yeah.
But at first I was kind of bored with it, because there are so many names, and I was trying to keep track of things in my head, like a linear timeline, and it just became impossible. And once I gave that up, then I got really interested in it, because I started seeing, just thinking about like going back to some of my impressions when I was young about the Iraq War, for example, and how naive I was at the time. I opposed the Iraq War. I knew then that the justifications were BS, but I didn't have a deep understanding of why I thought that. I couldn't understand why they were manufacturing, in my opinion anyway, manufacturing reasons to go into Iraq. And so I don't think at that time I was still somewhat idealistic, and I tended to put people into either good or evil, like that sort of splitting things. People are good or evil. I hated W, so I was like, they're evil. And the PNAC, the Project for a New American Century and stuff, which he touches on in the book, I had read a lot about those guys at the time, and I considered it to be something, these guys are evil. Now 20 years later, with the advantage of age, I guess, and life experience, and then finally dipping into some stuff like this, I guess I tend to view it more as people get caught up in systems, and there's like a machine. We talk about the military industrial complex, for example. There's a machine, the intelligence agency machine, that just keeps rolling. And it seems, having read this, I kind of view it as, they continually make bad decision after bad decision, sometimes because they have a goal of securing power or oil or resources in these other countries, but other times just because they're trying to cover up past mistakes. So I enjoyed it. I definitely think he I can imagine where some of the people might be coming from who didn't like the author of the book, because I think he has a definite bias against like Trump, for example, or he is a writer from the left, and I think he has a couple of blind spots, but we all do. He would probably say, I have a blind spot by saying that. He'd probably like some of the ways he referred to people, I would underline when I disagreed with him, like, really? Like, he was like, he's this extreme alt-right, Nazi. They didn't call him Nazi, but extreme alt-right, blah, blah, blah. Like, he did call Gavin McInnes, I think, a white nationalist. And I'm like, that's just not true. I would underline those things. Like, you have a complete bias here that's obscuring part of the picture. But on the other hand, he would probably put me in the group with those people. So who knows? Anyway, that's my general first impressions.
Yeah, I agree that he had a bias, but I think it was like, I don't know. I liked the book, actually, because the bias, I'm kind of used to that bias. The bias to me was just it was just that he didn't question mainstream leftist morality. That was his bias. Like, and it was like, he's not a philosophical thinker. He didn't think about morals. He didn't think about philosophy. He doesn't think about culture. He's just detached from any high level thought about that. He's just really in the weeds on, here are all the things that the military industrial complex did. And because he's so much in the weeds, he can see the evil there, and talk about it. And one thing that actually struck me was that he wrote an entire book about how what I would call the deep state functions, and then puts the word deep state in scare quotes like it's a weird right-wing thing. It's like, you just wrote a book about the deep state, and now you're mocking the idea that someone calls it a deep state. That's literally what your entire book is about. So I thought that was weird. And for me, I like the details, because I knew like a 2-sentence summary of things like Afghanistan. I'm like, okay, yeah, I know. We armed the Mujahideen, and we tried to drag Russia into war, or Soviet Union into war, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. And I kind of knew about the Iraq stuff, but I didn't know the details. And I found the details, like, I didn't know anything about Syria. So that I found that super fascinating. I never really understood where the hell ISIS came from and how they were different from Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda, right?
Yeah, it was like, oh, like, it was super interesting to see. And actually to see how intimately involved the FBI is in so much of this crap. I kind of always blamed the CIA, and I still do, for the stuff outside of our borders, but the FBI seems to be really active inside of our borders, trying to basically push the deep state agenda, for lack of a better phrase. I don't know. I liked the book, though. Generally, I thought it was a useful book.
Carter, you mean push the deep state agenda?
Right. Yeah. Again, and he also did this weird. He had a weird relationship with Trump too, where he did this thing where he just like he would dismiss people. I mean, he would a xenophobic, Islamophobic, neo-Nazi, racist. He just all the kind of ad hominems. But then at the same time, in the afterword was like super refreshing, because I was like, oh, here's a weird leftist who has like zero thought about philosophy or culture. Even he sees that Russiagate is bullcrap. And even he describes Russiagate just as well as Dan Bongino would, for example. Like, he goes right into there. He talks about Russiagate. He talks about the Clinton email stuff, and he's spot on. So I really appreciated that about him. He still, had that bias, but the areas that he has knowledge, he's honest about what the knowledge pieces together to mean. And I found that very important. So.
Yeah, I felt like you could separate his knowledge that he's imparting, which is a lot. You could separate that from any of his own moral opinions or biases. And I'm really grateful for the knowledge.
Exactly.
Are we sure the knowledge is correct? Has anybody bothered to actually check up on some of his supposed facts? I haven't.
I did check up on some, although I, like you, that thought immediately struck my mind, because I was like, well, I know he's lying about this stuff here. but his lies tended to be less of lies and more like lazy, broad generalizations that weren't researched. The details, all the details I checked, and I didn't check a lot, but I checked into some of the details about the what was that kid, the kid's name who was found face down. Like I checked into some of those details about his family and what was going on there. I checked in some of the details about one of the World Trade Center bombing, I think was in this book, right? I checked. I knew that those details were correct as far as I knew, and he got all the Trump Russiagate and the CNN or the Clinton stuff correct. So the details that I knew and the ones that I checked were correct. But when he says Steve Bannon is like a neo-Nazi, that's not a detail. That's just an ad hominem. So I think most of the stuff for me that I could tell, most of the stuff he got wrong was just broad generalizations, not details. But I don't know.
It's really easy to do because we all have unrecognized bias, and then labeling is just an easier thing to do.
Yeah, and he repeated like, what was the other thing he did that bothered me? Oh, he did like he would say, like, he repeated the grab him by the pussy thing that Trump said as bragging about sexual assault, which it's not, and it wasn't, right? So like, I guess you could say that's a detail that he got wrong, but it was the characterization of the event that he got wrong, not the event himself.
Right.
Trump did say those words. He just mischaracterized it.
That's what I mean about separating the opinion or his characterization of certain things from facts, right?
Right.
I thought he gave me anyway a lot of facts that I haven't had.
So. Wait, I'm fact checking on you, Carter, right now, which is I have the Kindle version of the book, and I'm looking under neo-Nazi, and I'm not coming up with Bannon at the same time. Are you sure?
Yeah, I might be wrong. It might not be Bannon that he said neo-Nazi. I know he used word neo-Nazi. I don't remember.
There's 6 matches, but none of them, as far as I can tell, have Bannon.
I know he said some things about Bannon. He said some things about Geert Wilders. He said some things about Milo, Gavin McInnes. Like, I don't remember all the people that he said. Neo-Nazis was in one of those somewhere.
He did not call Bannon a neo-Nazi. He called him a Hollywood hack.
Okay. He also threw neocon around a lot, which I don't know what neocon means anymore after reading this book. I'm kind of, does it just mean you like war? I don't know.
He really had a problem defining his terms. I felt like he threw a lot of terms around without definition. And I was bothered by not any time, but I can't say I read this in depth. I just finished it, but in the footnotes, several times I would kind of go back. I find it hard to I would like to see footnotes in something like this as opposed to endnotes. So I looked at the endnotes a few times, and I saw the reference to the source was Max Blumenthal. I go, oh, okay.
This is Tamara. I was probably in a unique position out of this group that I was working for a defense contractor around 2000 through 2015. So I was helping design and support manufacturing lines for military hardware when the Iraq War ramped up. And there was a definite, I'm going to say a lot of the defense policies are sticking to the stereotypes they had 50 years ago. They would reference, we took over Japan, we took over Germany, we instituted democratic institutions, and now they're our biggest allies. So if we take over Iraq and throw out the dictator and do democracy building, we'll have a democratic ally in the Middle East. That was their assumption for Iraq and Afghanistan. There's also and this book actually traces part of saying, fight communism, fight Russia. And that was the enemy, the goal. And the book here with Blumenthal does talk about how the CIA supported Iraq against Iran, and then they wanted to get money to fight the Contras, so they sold missiles to Iran to fund the anti-communist stuff. Well, we're 30, 40 years later, and it's still Russia, Russia, Russia. Russia's our enemy. Russia, Russia, Russia. We need to blame something. Blame Russia. And it's like a lot of our government policies are still based on Cold War enemies, Cold War threats, even though we're decades later.
Keith, did you see the same thing? Because you were working in the defense industry probably at that time, unless you retired before then.
No, I was definitely working in defense industry. 2001, I was GE Aerospace. I distinctly remember the attitude of everybody there, which was, we got to bomb the shit out of the Russians. I happened to be working on electronics for the ship that they used to bomb Syria at the time. So yeah, I spent 30 years in the deep state. As far as fact checking this, everything I knew about, I didn't find anything wrong. But I think it would take a year to fact check this book, maybe impossible. I'm curious where he got all that. Like you said, I was in it for 30 years till I met Carter. He's in it too.
I was part of the deep
does
state.
Shit like this. The stuff I knew about, like I know some stuff about Iran. I know some stuff about Nicaragua. I know somebody that met George Bush in Nicaragua when he was head of the CIA. Like this kind of stuff has been going on for way before this book. I agree with all you guys. You talk about the manipulative terms. He throws around emotionally manipulative adjectives all the time. So that was a little frustrating, but after 2 years of listening to Kerry and Carter on this show, I'm pretty good at just ignoring all that bullshit and just looking for the facts. I didn't see anything, nothing jumped out at me in the facts. And I did check into a couple things that I didn't know about and didn't find anything wrong. But I can't believe anybody could fact check this. And, I was almost skeptical reading it. But anyway, my summary, the whole thing, it's entirely a conspiracy theory. I talked to some people from work. This is all conspiracy theory. We should just stop book club now. Talk about something else.
Oh, that's so funny.
Other first impressions from people who have.
So when I finished reading the book, like I think Carrie and some of you have already said, I noticed that at the beginning when he was referring to certain people, especially more on the right side, he would always, put some word that would be a negative, right? Like an ad hominem attack or something. And it was very noticeable on every person that would be seen on the right. He would always say something like, "Oh, he's a neoconservative," he's outright or something. They always jump at you, and it was more that something that obviously was his opinion. So at the beginning, when you start reading the book, it sort of makes you think, well, with a grain of salt, well, makes you doubt what he's saying. But after you keep reading it, you start seeing a lot of facts. I looked into some stuff myself. I do agree that a lot of the facts that he's saying, I think that at the end, when you go into the afterword where he talks about what we've been living through the last 3-4 years, he seemed very objective. It didn't sound like he was being subjective. He seemed more honest to me and the way he wrote it. So it sort of gave it more validity in terms of some of the things that he was saying, whether I agree with him or not, right? So I liked that sense of the book, and it did open my eyes a little bit in certain things. And I think it brought me back to the idea of how and we've experienced it, we've been seeing it, how the media or we're constantly being fed a point of view, whether it's from the right, whether it's from the left. Obviously, over time, maybe it's been moving more towards one side than the other, but maybe 30, 40, and 20 years ago, the way the manipulation was happening was more towards, we need to get everybody on board with a war in Iraq, right? We're in Iraq. We have to go in there. Saddam Hussein is a terrorist. He was part of the plot to bring down the 9/11 and all that. And I always think that the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but the book was very good. Obviously, it was more from the left side. You could tell he had a little bit of bias in that regard, but I enjoyed the book, and I believe that in this day and age, we have to actually not believe just what we're told from media. We have to find out and do our own research, because now we can't even trust anything almost.
Yeah,
So
Manny, to your point, Manny, do you remember the part where he said, I can't find it now, but it was a study that was done that said during the Iraq War, they found that the more people consumed coverage, news media coverage about the war, the less they knew about the war.
yeah, because you're being fed the story. The reality was there was a need. We need to get everybody on board to support this. And obviously, I think that most people back then probably would have said, yeah, we need to go over there because we're hearing the story from one side. And now, but you're right. Yeah.
This book was a description of that to me. Keith, you mentioned that comic the other day to me. This book was like exact. Do you want to describe the comic of the two people? Do you remember
Was
this?
it the one with the two puppets? Oh
No,
no,
it's
I
like
know the
they're
one. I thought you one
yeah,
I posted, which is the Democrat and the Republican Party
yeah.
with the big fat guy underneath. Okay, the one I mentioned to you was the stick drawing of Sally and Jim, and like the little stick drawing, and it says Sally voted Democrat, Jim voted Republican. They can still be friends because they both want to bomb Iran.
That to me, that's like a summary of the book. It just I looked at that and I thought, I guess the Hollywood's involvement, the media's complacency, is that even a word? How the media was complicit. Just he has that one passage where he talks about Anderson Cooper talking to the I think it was the Syrian ambassador, and just like acting like what you're saying is ridiculous. I know the narrative and it's this thing here, and just really pushing this what I would call a deep state narrative. And it really makes me to me, one of the things that it does is underscores to me how Trump, I come away from this, as much as he hates Trump, I come away from this going, well, Trump is clearly the hero. He's the one guy in this entire play. He's the one character who says no. He's the one character in the entire play on both sides everywhere who says, I don't want to. Now he fails a little bit and he lets his kind of team take over, but he's the one guy who kind of says, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be bombing people. I think we should pull out. So it really sets it up for me. I come away from this book feeling my opinion being reinforced that there really isn't a huge difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. There is a difference between the kind of statist machine and outside opposition, and that's really the battle to be fighting, not whether it's Mitt Romney or Hillary Clinton, because they're the same.
To your point about heroes in the book, one person who really stood out as being, no, we have to stop, is Tulsi Gabbard. With her,
she's the other one.
Stop arming insurgents. And it's like, yes, that is something I can agree with. Let's just stop.
Yeah, and it made sense to me why they hate her once he explained it that way.
Exactly, Alex, to your point, that they hated Tulsi, and being someone who voted for her and liked her, the way the media turned on her, and then I heard people I know on the left who are squarely in the propaganda echo chamber just almost mindlessly just repeating whatever sound bites had been pummeled into their head about why they should hate her. They hated her as much as they hated Trump. And I think it's for that same reason. Of course they hate her.
It's very difficult. Like, what I've learned is the hardest thing to do is change the way one thinks. And as we age with our brains and, growing new neural pathways and all that other kind of stuff, like, I believe like Trump and Tulsi Gabbard and, they were an opportunity to see things differently. And it's just, people are very protective of the way they see the world. And it's like, almost like something, an insidious illness came in and was trying to, but like people, they don't want their minds to be changed, and it's very difficult to allow another way of thinking in. So people, like, I see a lot of the way people react and are acting towards someone that is different, that is coming in, that has something good to offer, as almost like an attack on their own psyche.
And it just shows the Democrat Party mainstream now is at least as much hawkish on pro-war as the Republicans. And it's interesting, the last two elections, the Republican candidate was the one who was less into war. Like the Democrats are for war more now, I think, but it's just another form of welfare. It's just welfare for weapons manufacturers. I mean, somehow they have to justify $1 trillion a year.
Is there anyone else who wants to give first impressions who hasn't spoken yet?
Sure. I can say, yeah, I reiterate what some people have said. I thought, oh my God, how am I going to keep track of all these people,
names,
acronyms, names? And I thought, whoa, it'd be really useful if you had actually like a glossary, linked glossary. So every time you see a term, you could click on it and get a definition. But anyway, he didn't do that. Or I guess whoever did the Kindle version could have done that. Anyway, but also just, yeah, I had all these like philosophical kind of thoughts. You know, I didn't come from it feeling despair. I was like, oh, well, I can understand everyone, like all the actors, like they're all just trying to do their best, you know, they're not like evil people. Although I guess, yeah, like what is the nature of evil? That was like what was coming to me. Is it something that emerges out of big institutions? Like once you have these big institutions, then people are like trying to, someone said, cover up for past mistakes, or they just think, oh, well, we can't say the truth because it might hurt these people. And then they end up doing some things that actually hurt people even more. And so that was one thing that I had the first impression. I don't know. And then the other thing is the whole thing about how these two sort of like cops and robbers or SJWs and white supremacists, or, you know, they're sort of creating each other. So here it's the jihadists and the neocons are like counterparts of each other, and they're both kind of egging each other on, or not necessarily neocons. It could be what he called the humanitarian hawks, like Hillary Clinton, and all her bunch. It's like it's a weird psychological dynamic that seems to happen where, yeah, I don't know. I also like to think about it in Jungian terms. They each have these shadows and they're projecting them on each other. Anyway, that's just my.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I had the same thought. Am I kind of comparing the way like the war machine and the jihadi insurgents each rely on each other and have the same goals in many cases, and are like they want the other to do the thing. You know, sort of how he talked about how PNAC wanted there to be something like September. They felt like they needed that to progress their goals. It's almost they feed off each other. And yeah, I think currently culturally we're seeing the same sort of symbiotic relationship with the social justice left, and then maybe the actual alt-right, or, you know, like white nationalism, that kind of thing.
Do they actually exist? I mean, are these people real, or are they only in the imagination of SJWs? Like
I think they exist, but they've been a very they haven't been. I don't think they've been very. They've been a laughingstock for so long, but I think that's changing. I think they are growing.
They're growing, right?
Yeah.
Thanks to the radical left. But
that's right.
I don't want to take away free will, but, you know, just as someone who obviously is a voluntarist and is not a big fan of large government anyway, I partly look at this and I think it's not necessarily that people started out trying to be evil, but that once you're part of an organization that has a specific purpose, like growing that organization and continuing in that purpose is not something that's ever questioned. Like, so when that purpose is fulfilled, you see this with You see this with stuff all the time. You saw this with the feminist movement when, like, okay, well, we've achieved equality, we've achieved all these things. We can't just pack up and go home now because our job is done. We have to keep expanding and go for more and more. And the same thing happens with, oh, we're fighting communism, we're fighting communism. Oh, the Soviet Union broke up now. Oh, we can pack up and be done. Like, no, you can't pack up and be done. This is what we do. And you're kind of caught, you're sucked into this ever expanding thing that you forget why you're doing it in the first place and what the moral reasons for its existence were in the first place. And you just get caught up in this thing that's been labeled good in your head. And you're not, this is one of the reasons why I think governments, they always grow. You never have a government that starts out some size and shrinks. It always grows over time because every institution of power always has one of its implicit goals is to like self-propagate and to give itself more power. It's just how it works. So I kind of see this as a byproduct of that.
You know, we always heard about the Cold War ending. There was going to be a peace dividend, you know, and that's what I heard about as a kid in the 70s and 60s.
Right.
Where's the peace dividend? But like I said, when the Cold War ended, I was already working for a military contractor. So yeah, there's no peace dividend. They just had to look around. And I look at it as what George Bush, the first George Bush did, is he needed a new reason to spend $500 million a year on military. He needed something to do. Like, I got this whole huge apparatus. We need something to do. He looked around like, the Middle East, they can replace Russia as the new boogeyman. And when this one ends, when the Middle East ends, if they eventually give up because they realize that we can't fix the Middle East, that's obvious. They'll probably just look around and find something else. Like, there's no reason for us not to expect they won't find something else.
It wasn't just them looking around. I think they were kind of influenced a lot by people in Israel like Netanyahu. By the way, I was born in Israel, and so I have a bias, but not towards Netanyahu. Just to state up front that my father was actually somewhat of a pacifist, and he kept trying to vote for politicians who would actually make peace with the Arabs, and they never got enough votes, or I don't know, to make a difference. And in the end, it was ironic that the person who assassinated the Prime Minister Rabin, who actually was trying to make peace, was a Jewish extremist, a Jewish terrorist in effect. So that was, like, I think maybe the irony that cinched it for my parents, and they decided to just leave Israel and come hopefully to this better place, the United States. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. My thinking is clouded by a lot of emotion when I think of terrorism vis-a-vis Israel and the Arabs. So yeah, there was a lot in the book about that. Anyway, sorry, that's all I had to say.
No, don't be sorry for that. Did you find anything else in there, anything that was wrong in there when we talked about Israel? Because you probably know more about Israeli history than most.
I don't know if I know that much. I left there when I was 11 years old. But yeah, I mean, it sounded correct from what I saw. But like Netanyahu is not some monster either. Like his brother was killed in some commando operation where a bunch of other terrorists took over a plane to Entebbe, I think Uganda, or anyway, and there's like 200 Israelis on board, and then the Israelis had a commando operation with. I forget what was his name. Also, anyway, his brother, Netanyahu's brother, and he was the leader of the operation, and he actually was the only one who got killed. And I think ever since then, Netanyahu just hates Arabs. I mean, and also wants to protect Israel. It's understandable, but he's not an evil person. Like, I understand where he's coming from. still, I'm not saying his policies are creating the results he might want, or I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
I found one thing interesting about this is that Blumenthal's able to like see all the stuff that's going on and remain almost like a cultural relativist, right? Like if you want to actually solve these problems and think deeply about these problems, you have to actually answer the difficult question. Like, yes, maybe the CIA and the US's involvement generally did like absolutely cause rise of ISIS and Al Qaeda and everything else, and like that's all correct. And at the same time, it doesn't mean that those ideologies are somehow neutral and we don't need to be wary of those ideologies, and that they don't need to be avoided and condemned, and we need to protect ourselves, because it's weird to me how he clearly must see that fundamentalist Islam is not compatible with liberal Western values. He's got to see that. And yet he characterizes any pushback as xenophobia and racism, and like only Nazis would push back on this thing. So it's weird when we refuse to ask philosophical questions, everything's just really messy, and you can't find the solution, because it just seems like you're just trying to look for proximate causes for everything constantly.
Yeah, I had that same reaction that Carter is having, and that's really to my mind the big fault of the book, because I feel like he's blaming the rise of Donald Trump on the half of the American public that voted for Donald Trump, and he's saying we did it out of Islamophobia. So basically, the line he's drawing is the CIA and the FBI created ISIS and Al Qaeda, which created a disposal problem, which caused, a whole bunch of some real terrorists, some potential terrorists, some non-terrorists, but, they start coming into the country. We start having terrorist incidents. And then he goes, oh, but you're Islamophobic. And it made me think, well, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Both things can be true. It could be true that the people who live next door to you, who recently arrived in the country and don't speak English and have cars coming all day and all night, maybe it's perfectly innocent, but then it turns out that a bomb goes off somewhere. So don't call me Islamophobic for saying that we need to address this and notice this. And don't call everybody who voted for Donald Trump an Islamophobe, because I think millions of people were not thinking about terrorists when we voted for Donald Trump. We were thinking how much we didn't like Hillary. So when I pick up a work of fiction that's marketed toward the general public, my starting assumption is that the author wants to educate people. And what I found with this book is, so I had two reasons why I felt he wasn't doing a good job of educating. One is you put off half your audience by blaming them for voting for Donald Trump. So, we've all heard that before. But the other thing he did that is more of a, just a real, just kind of a critique of the book itself is, if he actually wanted to educate people, we wouldn't all have the same reaction of, I lost track of the timeline, so I started skipping around. He, instead of giving us enough information to explain his point, it's like he threw in every fact he knows, which made me say, I am not the audience. He's writing for think tanks to impress them. He's not writing for me, the general reader, to educate me. So on the one hand, he's alienated me. And on the other hand, just on the, from the perspective of how is the book to read, he's not made it readable. So I'm not his audience. He's not trying to educate me, which is a shame because he's got a great command of the material. I wish his goal had been to educate me, because I think we all want that education, but I didn't get it from this book.
Is it Aline? Is that how you pronounce your name?
Aline.
Aline. Is this your first book club?
It is.
Thank you for coming. That was a very badass description and succinct, and I understand exactly what you're saying. Yeah. I do. Yeah, I did feel that's interesting that you say you think his audience is more of maybe think tanks and stuff.
Well, let me add, part of the reason I say that is because I was having a hard time following the line of the book. I thought, let me watch some interviews of him on YouTube. Maybe I'll get a better sense of what he's trying to say. And every interview I saw with him really came across as, hey, look how smart I am. And it just, I didn't get any more out of watching him being interviewed on YouTube than I got from reading the book. which is basically, look at me, I'm so smart. And as I say, it's a shame because there's great material there and a very important story to be told.
Yeah, I treated the book as just like a list of facts. These things happen. I do want to check some of them, and then just ignored all this other stuff, the Trump stuff and all the emotional manipulative stuff. But he goes on for long periods of time with just lists of facts. Here's what happened. Here's what happened. Here's what happened. So I'm not a think tank person, but I used it to say, like, this is just one example after the other. Boom, 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 boom. CIA did this. CIA did this. CIA did this. And I thought of his Trump connection as him just saying that Trump probably would not have happened if the CIA hadn't and the U.S. military hadn't overthrown, a dozen countries. And 9/11 wouldn't have happened, right? Like I would rather have the Twin Towers than Afghanistan be overthrown. I think it's likely 9/11 won't happen. And maybe Trump wouldn't have got elected because he wouldn't have had this whole Islamophobia backlash.
I agree. The book would have been stronger if he'd said, we armed Muslim fundamentalists in Afghanistan to take out the Russians in the 80s and got the Taliban. And then they did a repeat of arming Muslim fundamentalists in Iraq and Syria in order to try to take out Assad and got ISIS. That is a perfectly logical parallel of saying we made this mistake several times. Oh, and taking out Gaddafi in Libya helped create Boko Haram or another group in North Africa whose name I don't remember at the moment, and saying we've made this mistake several times. But he never made a direct statement of here's the historical parallels of how we screwed this up. Or we aid this ally and then we screw them over. So we did that to Saddam Hussein, and that's why he hated us. We aided him against Iran, and then we gave Iran missiles to help fight the Contra, get money to fight the Contras. And then we did some of the same stuff with the Kurds in Iraq. We're going to help you. No, we're not going to protect you. If he had made just some of those overarching parallels as bulleted lists of takeaways, that would have helped.
I think also like what Aline said, he didn't really make a conclusion. He throws out a bunch of emotionally manipulative terms that kind of let you to see what he thinks, but he doesn't really end with a conclusion. The conclusion is that we caused some of these problems. I would like to see him do a prequel, because he starts in Afghanistan, but I'd like to see him go back to like Iran in '53 when the CIA and MI6 got rid of the democratically elected prime minister and installed the Shah. And then that eventually led to the revolution. Or go back even further, Korea, talk about Vietnam, talk about World War II. I think we should just treat this as like a list of facts and draw our own conclusions and kind of ignore his like little hints at a conclusion.
Yeah. There's another comparison I wanted to point that he failed to make, but before I do that, or I'll do it at some point, I just want to make sure we hit some of the people who haven't had a chance to speak yet. If there's anyone who wants to, because I think we still have 3 or 4 people who haven't.
Well, I think this book could have been a lot shorter if he just did a go back to high school geometry proof flowchart and say this equals this because this, and then we wouldn't have gotten, the right-wing people wouldn't have gotten pissed off and distracted by the constant theory and alt-right and neocon stuff, which is my bias. I was distracted over getting the facts because I wanted the facts. I want to have those interesting tidbits and make my own decision based off that. But the distraction of, Jared Kushner is a moron or whatever. Like you can't do any of that and and convert me. Like you can't be a douchebag. Excuse me. You can't be a person belittling me and then expect me to convert to your way of thinking. So I think he would have converted more right-leaning people, more at least logical, and I'm an engineer, so logically minded people if he had just done a proof, but then he wouldn't have gotten a book deal. So
Cheeky Mare, maybe you should do that flow chart for us, because I started to try to draw one and it looked like I was trying to solve a murder, and like a conspiracy.
You are trying to solve a murder.
Get some red string and a wall in your house. Yeah, you'll be fine.
Anyone else? What about Christina? You're muted, Christina.
Muted.
There we go. I only made it about a quarter of the way through because I have a hard time with names when it's John Smith and Eileen Johnson. You start throwing these 47 syllable Arabic names at me and I'm totally lost. It just, two things really came to my mind. One is, boy, is the woke left going to be in for a surprise when all these insurgents they armed in the US to try to take down Donald Trump, Trump's gone and they turn on them. Woohoo, you're going to have a disposal problem, aren't you? And the other thing was this sense of there being nobody you can trust. It's like, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. There's all these people behind the scenes pulling strings, hiring PR campaigns to convince us of things. It makes Wag the dog look like amateur hour. And add to that the fact that we just had Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani basically saying, lizard people from Venezuela conspired with CIA operatives in Barcelona to hack the election for the Democrats. And it's like, it doesn't sound crazy anymore. It's like, oh my God, I don't know. And my takeaway was, I just don't know what to think other than it seems like there's nobody that can be trusted at all.
Yeah. I love your hat, by the way. Very lovely.
Christina,
it's a homemade Buster Keaton hat.
I resonate with a lot of what you just said. I would say that this book made me feel very spooked. Like I just kept reading something and then I was just like, okay, yeah, my worst conspiracy theories are probably right. Cool. That's great. I've also been watching House of Cards while reading this book, so that's probably a really bad combination. But yeah, kind of one of my overall impressions was that, like, I think what I like about Trump is that he doesn't fit the mold of a politician. He's actually, I think in a weird kind of way, he's like apolitical. He's not, but I think like he doesn't fit the mold that people like. He can't. We were talking earlier about how once you're in an organization and the organization wants to do a certain thing, there's not much you can do. You have to go along with it. I feel like Trump is, because he is such a larger in life persona, they can't do that to him. They can't fit him into this, like, you must cooperate. Like, he doesn't care. He'll just keep going. And I think I figured out why. I literally like wrote it in my book as I was reading. I was like, I think I know why I like Trump. It's because he doesn't speak like a politician. He's not eloquent. He's clumsy. He says stupid things that are, of course, going to be grabbed by the media and taken out of context. But I love that because I know I'm not being bullshitted. That's what makes it refreshing. So with all of his faults, like I think Carter said earlier, like I agree. Like I think Max Blumenthal, like he is in a weird kind of way, because he starts to list facts so often. Sometimes he can be almost unbiased. Like, not, he's definitely got his bias, but I was able to kind of take it as that. And through listing all of his facts, I'm like, yeah, Trump doesn't actually seem that bad in the large cast of characters. I definitely agree with that. There was something else I was gonna say on that note, but the other thing, so there was just one little thing that spooked me also, and it was in a mention, it was very briefly, and it was with regard to the Boston Marathon bombings, and like I don't know if this was Blumenthal's bias creeping in. Like, I don't know if he's like mind reading what the people were saying, or if this was like an actual statement, but they were like, oh, like the people just went into lockdown. They didn't question anything. They just went. And I was like, oh no, like it's happening. Like, so anyway, that was my general impression.
That was,
Yeah, now it doesn't even take a bomber.
Yeah, and it's funny that the same people mocking Trump for talking about the deep state, if Blumenthal's right, they are the deep state. So the lizard people are standing there going, there's no lizard people. It's freaky stuff going on.
So much gaslighting.
Yeah, there is a lot. You know, that's one of the things that have you seen Cernovich's? Has anyone seen Cernovich's short documentary on Qatar, or Qatar, I guess it's pronounced? It's like 20 minutes. It's totally worth watching. But the amount, and Max talks about this in this book a little bit, but the amount of money coming from Saudi Arabia and Qatar and other large Middle Eastern funders into think tanks and PR agencies in America that produces, I'll say reports in quotes, that get picked up and used both to make legislation and to inform news media about what's going on is shocking. It's shocking how and the fact that we don't actually have journalists, and like we don't have journalists really for the most part. We have people who will read this stuff and parrot it back, or ask a question of a senator and parrot it back to us. That we just have people who regurgitate stuff that no one actually fact checks or investigates or makes sure anything's true or questions the source. We never hear about the fact that Saudi Arabia funded this and Qatar's funding that, and this organization that put this report out has an agenda very clearly, and and you don't have to look that hard to see the agenda. And that's one of the things that scares me most, because we all kind of know about the military-industrial complex, and we all kind of, I think both sides kind of recognize that that's there, but the fact that there really is, not only is there no oversight by the press or the people at all, there's the opposite. There's the press is a propaganda arm for this, and that really is pretty scary, because the people are the last bulwark against misbehavior. Like, we're the ones supposed to be keeping the government in check, and we don't know. I think someone else on this chat said we don't know what to believe, because we don't
have a fourth estate. Yeah, everything's propaganda. And there was a part in here where he almost used the phrase from Noam Chomsky, basically that the press had manufactured consent from the public for the war. Yeah. Here on page 109, this isn't the one I was looking for, but he says he was among the hundreds of thousands who protested the Iraq war. So was I. The movement's size and reach was surprising, considering the tsunami of pro-war media. It was later calculated that there were 6 positive stories about the case for war for every critical one. And it's just it was the media's job. He says later, the Iraq war, he quoted someone as saying the Iraq war was possibly the first US war the first war based almost entirely on a covert propaganda campaign targeting the media. I mean, they used the media. One thing to go back to people talking about Trump and maybe his blind spot on Trump, I did think he failed to make the comparison between, like, he was a part of the hundreds of thousands protesting the Iraq war, right? And he clearly views that as a good thing. And he's almost saying, he says the movement size, the anti-war movement size at that time and reach was surprising, considering the amount of pro-war propaganda we were being fed. But then he fails to make that comparison, I think, with Trump. It's like, if there were 6 positive war stories for every 1 critical war story, look at Trump. There's probably 50 critical stories about Trump for every 1 positive one. It's even more propaganda. And yet he doesn't seem to empathize with the Trump voter in the way that he empathized with and was one of the war protesters. I thought that was a kind of a failed comparison there that he doesn't.
Yeah, you're making me think of one of the most obvious biases that I noticed in the book was when he talked about. Hold on, I might even have a page reference. Yeah, on page 263 in I have this copy. He talks about the LGBTQ support.
Yeah.
And he paints this picture of the Republicans as this like evangelical 1980s version of like moral majority kind of people that just don't exist. They don't exist. And I mean, some of them do, but that's not Republic. He won't give them any credit for actually. Maybe they actually care about LGBTQ issues, and maybe they're sincere about this. And he says, he calls it. What does he say?
Many members of the party base believe
that they were possessed by satanic demons. He's talking about lesbians and gays. By laundering pro-gay politicking behind the narrative of Islamophobia, Trump was able to neutralize any evangelical backlash while targeting a demographic that had turned solidly against the GOP. So he's basically saying, like, he didn't even mean it. He doesn't mean it. They don't mean any of this stuff. It's like, and he's living in this world where he thinks that Pat Robertson is still like the example of the Republican Party. Which is just so dishonest to me. That's something that I thought was extremely dishonest. He can't actually believe that. That's got to be dishonest. He can't be that disconnected from what's happening today.
No, I think he is.
That's actually, derangement syndrome.
In the 1980s, there was a huge thing within the evangelical community about how, like, there was all this satanic involvement in government, and people were getting demon possessed, and Procter and Gamble was part of the greater satanic narrative. And Pat Robertson was a presidential candidate. I believe it was the 1980s or 1990s.
So maybe the 80s. I remember.
Yeah. So he's probably just like kind of stuck back there. Maybe it was traumatic for him himself, and he's just kind of working out his own traumas in that statement. That's all I can think of.
Yeah, but I mean, that's so not true anymore.
He assumes right? I mean, that they're disingenuous.
He's 42, so yes. He was born in. I'm looking him up. He was born in 77. So okay, like he wasn't even voting age when Pat Robertson was running.
It is possible that Blumenthal is actually that Christophobic. Handmaid's Tale is the Christian version of Elders of Zion, of look at these evangelical conservative Christians. They want to rape women. They want to force them to have babies and rape them. And they don't care about the women once they have the baby. They just want to oppress them. And it's smearing conservative Christians as wannabe Taliban. Handmaid's Tale, considered a top-selling Netflix series, because the book is taught in university as if it is true.
Which book?
If fascism comes to the United States, it's going to come waving a flag and carrying a Bible.
She's talking about The Handmaid's Tale, but I will interrupt here and say it is one of my favorite books. It's been my favorite book since I was 16. But when I actually got to take a whole class on it, on Margaret Atwood in college, and 20 years ago, it was obvious. We talked about how the subtext of that book was critical of radical Islam. We talked about how she was using conservative, like in her futuristic dystopia, she was basically saying, what if conservative religious fundamentalist Christians became this, anti-woman and this tyrannical and oppressive, but she was basing all of it on radical Islam. And now they've dropped that. They've dropped the subtext entirely. Like you're saying, Tamara, with the TV show is completely like, they're just taking it at face value and saying, oh, look, see how bad Christian religious fundamentalists are.
I've been accused of hate speech for saying there have been real world sex slave markets and ants as female enforcers. I see that both. It's like, well, you can't criticize Islam. That's Islamophobic. They had sex slave markets. They had women who were married to top guys going around putting piercers in the breasts of women who breastfed in public because, oh my God, they exposed their breast in public. And going, be afraid of the Christian conservatives. They're really evil. Now, and then Pence and Amy Coney Barrett get demonized as, being the Marthas and the head of the movement, and be afraid they're going to create a Christian Taliban. And then for somebody who's more secular like Trump, then it's like, he doesn't really believe it. He's a hypocrite. And I also noticed the very deliberate no true Scotsman fallacy that the neoconservative, very liberal Republicans like Bush 1 and 2, they're real conservatives. The conservative evangelical base that is a third to half of the Republican electorate, they're not real conservatives. They're wannabe Taliban. They're not conservatives. So if you reach across the aisle, you go talk to McCain and you go talk to Bush and you go ignore those evangelicals. They're not really Christians. They don't count. Go oppress them and be afraid of them. He is Christophobic and a bigot.
Well, he seems to be more afraid, like, they do seem to be more afraid of the Christian Taliban than the actual Taliban, right? Like, they've got this like, oh, Christians are going to do these crazy things. And it's like, but hey, Taliban, you need some guns and some training? Here you go.
And he then describes the Taliban. Islam has created multiple theocracies in the past 10 years, from Aceh province in Indonesia, ISIS in Iraq, Boko Haram in North Africa. I'm trying to remember the name of the one in the Somali Peninsula versus northern Nigeria. But here you've got multiple regions where everybody's a fundamentalist Muslim and creates these oppressive theocratic regimes. No, they're not really Muslim, but go bash the conservatives based on this minority little thing that never really happens, much less on a national scale.
That was one.
Well, I disagree with that. I don't look. Christianity is not pure either. Maybe not in recent years, but it does have a history of some serious problems, like the Inquisition and the Crusades.
Irrelevant. Utterly fucking irrelevant. Modern Christianity isn't murdering people in the name of Jesus. Muslims around the world are, including other Muslims, Sunni versus Shia, Sunni and Shia versus Alawite, Sunni and Shia versus the Almaty, who have been treated like crap for years in Pakistan. They are regularly killing each other across sects. Barring Ireland, you have not had Protestants and Catholics killing each other on a regular basis, quoting the Bible.
I don't think he's disagreeing, though. I think he's saying in the history, right, of Christianity, we have seen this, just not in modern times.
Yeah, but
Christianity contextualized the violence several centuries ago. Islam has yet to do so and murders those that.
Well, also you have to maybe think that Christianity is a more mature religion. Maybe it has had time to grow up.
Irrelevant.
Yes.
Islam is a 1,400-year-old faith. You can make that argument about Mormonism 100 years ago. You cannot make that argument about Islam today.
Well, let the atheist jump in, because I'm not biased about. I don't like any religion, so let's just be clear. Christianity has evolved since the time of the Crusades, and by the way, the Crusades are often mischaracterized because they're a reaction to Muslim aggression, largely, not completely, which no one talks about because you're not supposed to learn that. But Christianity has largely evolved, and you don't see modern Christian groups waging the equivalent of jihad, or even talking about waging the equivalent of jihad. You do, and you don't see that with the Mormons either, and you don't see that with the Scientologists, as weird as they are. You do see it with Islam. Islam still believes, and there are imams who are popular, who have large audiences, who still talk about using force and instituting a caliphate and slaughtering non-believers. So I think there is for me as an atheist, there is a distinct threat from Islam that is different from other religions that I see. Tell me I'm wrong, but that's modern Islam is different.
I wouldn't say Islam in general. Yes, there are certainly distinct Islamic subgroups, but like You don't see that with the Sufis, for example. The Sufis are peaceful.
No, not all
Generally.
Islam. Not
Right.
all Islam. But there are still large sects of Islam that do believe that.
Yes.
I'm
But it's
also
both-
an
yeah.
atheist, and so like, but I'm firmly in the sense that I believe that every like person has a right to practice their religion, you know, as long as it's not harmful to other people. And I had a serious problem with him, with his cognitive dissonance of saying we funded these extremists, and when they did, this is what happened to the women in those countries. They lost their jobs, they lost access to education, they had to cover themselves. Like he
Their lives,
recognizes
in some
that.
cases.
Yeah, their lives in some cases. He recognizes all that. But then he claims that no Muslims leaving these places brought any of that sexism with them to other nations. And it's like, that's impossible. I'm sorry. That like, not all of them. I will agree that I'm never a 100%, you know, that doesn't exist. There's like a million sects of freaking Christianity alone that I can recognize that not everyone is going to be like that. But I agree that Sharia law exists, and a lot of it is very, very violent and very like homophobic and sexist. It's misogynistic and it's racist, and not recognizing that is part of the problem. We cannot ignore it, and he ignored it. And in fact, he downplayed any kind of fear of it as Islamophobia. And it's like, that's not fair. That's not fair to the women it's hurt. It's not fair to the gay people that it's hurt. It's totally cruel to not recognize those victims.
I think you're so right, Alex. And I think by doing that, he does what he describes so well in the book between like fueling the thing that's supposedly your enemy. I think people who don't allow the conversation to happen about radical Islam and about, because they don't allow it to happen, you're actually, because I think he's very afraid of Islam, the word Islamophobia. It works. He uses it all the time. He's a believer in it. But I think he actually, in some ways, probably is helping to fuel Islamophobia because he doesn't seem to want to, I don't know, allow a criticism of the extreme elements that still exist in modern society, in Islam. And if you can't do that, it seems to me that naturally you might cause people who want to hear the truth and who want to be able to criticize those elements to gravitate towards the only people who are criticizing them, which might be people who are saying all Muslims are like this. And, you know, so.
Because they're the only ones willing to admit that it has a problem. There's even like a joke, like a graph of like interest versus like subject. And the subject is, do you want to talk about homophobia, racism, misogyny in the Muslim community? And then it dives because we're willing right now to talk about those three subjects, but not in relation to Muslims. And that's BS. They don't get a pass.
Right. And as soon as you bring it up, you get accused of saying all Islam is this, all Muslims are this, when like really all you're talking about is there is a non-negligible percentage of radical Islam.
Can you put a number on it, Carter?
I can't put a number on it, but I can say they're in control of several Middle Eastern territories right now, so it's not negligible. That's by definition, that's non-negligible. Do I know what the number is? No, but I don't know of any county in the States or a county-sized territory in the world that's in the control of radical Christian fundamentalists who are, abusing women and doing so. I don't know of that of any other religion, but it is true for Islam.
It's almost like asking to put a number on social justice ideologues in the US too, because I don't really know. I would use that term, Carter, non-negligible, but I don't know if it's a large number of people who are adherents to the belief system or if it's just the powerful mouthpieces. But either way, I think I'm concerned about it. So,
and in fairness, the US might have made that number less negligible than it would have been otherwise.
That's his point. That's right.
Yeah, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but it doesn't mean that just because we created it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's okay, but now it's here, and it has a lot of power, and it is a problem. And I don't think that the solution is for us to have, like, I don't want a military solution. I would pull out and, let the chips fall where they may, because I don't want interventionism. But I don't think it's it shouldn't be taboo to say, well, there is an element of this, and that element, and that element. Look, for all religion, I think if you want to be part of a Western liberal democracy, for any religion, we have to be able to say, look, these are the values of Western liberal democracy. You can come practice your religion, but you can't be incompatible with these values. And that goes true. That's for Christians, Jews, Muslims, anyone. These are the values that we hold. And if you're going to try and if you're going to upset those values, like, I don't know, women should be treated equally, a fundamental value, you shouldn't throw gays off of roofs. It doesn't matter what your religion is. That's something that's inimical to liberal Western values. And we seem to be afraid to have conversations about people's religion, unless it's Christianity. We seem to be afraid to have any kind of criticism. And as an atheist, that pisses me off, because religion deserves criticism. There's a lot of bad ideas in a lot of religions, and they're horrible ideas. And some of them are, not everyone in that religion believes that idea. I get that. There's different sects, and like, you can pick up the Quran and interpret it one way and pick up the Quran and interpret it another way. I get it. But some interpretations of many religious texts are pretty bad, and they should be condemned on moral grounds. And I would say the same thing about a radical Christian who was preaching that women shouldn't drive and have educations as well. Like, I would say the same thing about a Christian who interpreted the Bible that way. I just don't see many.
This is where the book really falls down. It basically says, there's a problem. I'm going to tell you how it works, but we can't have an honest discussion about the conclusions because you're a stupid right winger who voted for Trump. And that's why I say, if he had only done the first 2/3 of his subtitle, how the national security state gave rise to ISIS and Al Qaeda. If he'd stopped there, this would have been a valuable book. But he took it a bridge too far by saying, and the rise of Donald Trump. That's where he, jumps the shark, makes an invalid conclusion, and shuts down discussion of the actual problem.
Well, and then at the same time, he's like distilling down Trump's election down to one thing. And when I wrote about this, and there are like 1,000 different things that fed into the way, and it happened over 30, 40 years, how we got Trump. And it's not all about, our actions in the Middle East. There's a lot going on over here that happened that led to him. And some of them were legitimate, reasons to vote for him. And pretending like those reasons don't exist it's stupid.
Yeah, and there's even some kind of irony there, because I think one of the reasons that people voted for Trump is because they saw the entire deep state apparatus that Max Blumenthal spent an entire book laying out, and they don't like it. And Trump spoke against it, and they were like, I'll try this guy. So it's really ironic that he's like, well, this is just this crazy reactionary thing. And look, we might not have had Trump if it wasn't for Afghanistan, followed by Iraq, followed by like Libya. Like, maybe we wouldn't have, but he does paint it as like, oh, well, that's just racist, xenophobic stuff. There's nothing else there. And which is weird, because Trump is I think a lot of people voted for Trump precisely because they saw everything that Max Blumenthal was outlining in his book and saying, we don't like that either. This is the guy we think could stand up to it.
On the other hand, I will say this about his audience, because you mentioned, Aline, that you don't feel like you're in the audience he's writing to. He is on the left. And I think what's interesting about him drawing that line to Trump and trying to explain Trump to people on the left is that, like, I can imagine myself maybe 5 years ago, maybe around 2015 or so, I believed a lot of this stuff from the echo chamber. But I also I questioned authority at times. Like, I was in the group like he was, who protested the war and couldn't believe that Hillary Clinton and others were lining up for the Iraq war. And I think of who I was in 2015, and this would be a book that would, if he were writing it for that version of me, a person on the left, it might open my eyes to a lot of things. Like, for example, that Russiagate was a hoax, that the left the Democratic Party is no different than the Republican Party in some ways. And it's almost like Trump has become such a weird symbol, and, he can be used for a lot of different things. And I think for some people on the left who can't imagine abandoning their TDS yet, they're not at that stage yet. You might be able to hook them into this book by, I'm going to explain Trump to you. And along the way there, I'm going to give you all these facts that you don't know because you're plugged into the machine. I don't know. I think this book might actually be very eye-opening and revealing to someone who's still primarily in the echo chamber on the left and who hates Trump. It might open their eyes to some things. Yeah,
you're making a really good point. If all it does is convince a few people on the left that Russiagate was a conspiracy, if that's all it does, it will have been worth something.
There was a professor in 1996. He was a philosophy professor. I believe his name was, I'll find it. He actually predicted a Trump-like figure. His name was philosopher Richard Rorty in 2004. No, so in 1996, he actually predicted a Trump-like figure to come up, and he wrote a book about it. And then he ended up committing suicide. So,
why did he commit suicide? Does it have anything to do with?
Well, he was just a philosophy professor, and if you just get stuck in
knew what
philosophy,
was going to happen.
What did he say? Yeah.
No, but was he killed, or was it? I mean, was it?
No, he committed suicide just because he was stuck in.
Oh, I thought you meant he was. There were mysterious.
No, he wasn't murdered.
That's what I thought too. Okay. Yeah, but
no.
Okay.
It was an Epstein case.
Yeah, no.
Right.
I'm so sorry if I made it sound like that. No, he killed himself just because of his sense of hopelessness of the world, which could very, very easily, especially if you're a philosophy major or professor, you could go in circles and circles and end up in the same place and feel hopeless. But he predicted, he said members of labor unions and unorganized, unskilled workers will sooner or later realize that their government is not trying to prevent wages from sinking or to prevent jobs from being exported. Around the same time, they will realize the suburban white-collar workers themselves, desperately afraid of being downsized, are not going to let themselves be taxed to provide social benefits for anyone else. And he goes on, and I'll find the name of the book and I'll post it if anyone wants to. But this has been a long time coming. Trump is not, it's easy. It's really interesting because I look at like the psyche of a person who wrote, the Management of Savagery, and I make up a story in my own head. Well, this guy was probably like traumatized by an evangelical parents or that were really strict. And then many of us, many, if not all of us, act out of a place of trauma. And so when there's like these overarching labels and it's because of how we've been hurt. And so we can see how the author himself has these overarching terms and it comes from a place of trauma, I believe. And then I don't remember your name, sir. You grew up in Israel till the age of 11.
Yuval. Yes. I want to say something about what
I was going to say, thank you so much for saying these things like Netanyahu, his policies and all these things after the moment his brother died. Like these moments, these before and after moments that kind of dictate the rest of our lives if we're not careful, if we're not observant, and if we don't get the help we need, and then we get people that agree with us and say, yeah, that's right. And, like President Lincoln, although people argue about President Lincoln's reason for, initiating or whatever, like allowing the Civil War or agreeing with like slaves being able to vote and be free, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like he had men around him who disagreed with him, but they had the same goal. I feel that's very, very important. And that's why this book club is very important, because we have atheists, we have Christians, we have disagreements happening, and yet there's a sense of compassion and kindness and empathy. So I just want to encourage that.
Thank you. Yeah, I also wanted to say something about the trauma. So yes, there's personal trauma. Everybody has that, but there's also collective trauma. Like I know, like us Jews have collective trauma dating back, 2,000 years at least. But of course, a lot of people on the left would just use that as an excuse to not get better and start seeing the world in new ways. I mean, so people on the right always say personal responsibility. Yes, that's important also. And let's not use trauma as an excuse to not use our minds and hearts and try to think more clearly and try to make the world a better place as much as we can.
Yeah.
And also, I wanted to say about wait, what was it? The whole conspiracy theory thing. I mean, of course, there's a deep state. Yes, it's not. The thing that I don't like about a lot of conspiracy theories is that they sort of imply that there is one player that is doing, and in reality, there's many interests that are competing with each other. So it's hard to imagine that you can, just have the one player controlling everything. No, the competition exists even in the deep state, and the CIA is not always in cahoots with the FBI or with the executive branch, and Israel and Saudi Arabia are also competing. It's not, which I think is gives me hope that it's not so bad, in the end.
Well,
yeah,
you
there's
get
an
a lot
entire
of
play
unholy
behind
alliances.
the scenes. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying you get a lot of unholy alliances. You get people who don't have the same motivations, and yet they work together hand in glove to
For sure.
Achieve things. And okay, my main topic's abortion. When the National Organization for Women was deciding whether they were going to take a pro-life or a pro-choice stance, the Playboy Foundation and Zero Population Growth came to them and said, you guys need money. If you phrase this as a women's rights issue, we'll underwrite the campaign. And that's when the pro-life feminists splintered off and it became this 100% women's rights things. But if you look, you got the population control zealots who do not have choice on their list of things that matter to them. Eugenicists, deadbeat dads, it's this unholy alliance, and they pick their front man and put it forward. And, if it happens in this one purview, it's happening everywhere. That these alliances where you're willing to make a deal with the devil if they'll get you what you want.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very rare thing to find.
Good point. Yeah.
As we've seen though, with just look at this book, they're temporary, right? So there's kind of ephemeral alliances often. It's like, oh well, we like these guys. Well, now we like these guys. Well, now we think this is what we want to do, and this alliance works. Now it doesn't. We're supporting, Saddam. Now we have to kill Saddam. We've funded and trained bin Laden. Now he's the most evil person in the world. Granted, he had played a role in that, but there is a lot of. I kind of think of it as like there's the front that we're looking at, the front end that we're looking at, where people say things publicly and the media reports on stuff, but there's an entire theater behind the scenes of not, as Yuval said, not one person controlling it. There's just another theater behind the scenes of all these different agendas and fighting and things going on and alliances and all this stuff happening that we're just not privy to. We just don't get to see it because it's all hidden from us. And we just get some distilled version of whoever happens to be controlling our media outlets at that time, right?
I mean, I think it can look like a conspiracy because of what's happening. It just seems like it must be organized. How could this happen? When you're talking about a timeline, I started thinking about like the timeline, depending on how far back you wanted to go. If you want to start with Iran, We overthrew the government of Iran, installed a new government there. Then the timeline in Afghanistan, like we were good buddies with Saddam Hussein, right? We funded him for 10 years. We got him to start a war with Iran, who mostly used US weapons because we were previously buddies with them. And we started that whole war up, and like Saddam Hussein was a buddy. And then when they got the Russians to invade Iraq, that's when Osama bin Laden got involved, and we funded him and trained all his people and gave him weapons. And then he fought the Russians off and everything was cool. But it reminds me of a line Dave Smith uses. I don't know if you listen to his podcast, but he says, if you want to know who our next enemy is, just check to see who the government's funding right now. So if you use that rule, it's Saudi Arabia, I think. So it's like, it seems to me Saudi Arabia is our next enemy.
What about Israel? What about Israel?
Israel's maybe the one after that.
Okay.
Israel, I think, is too tied in with our government. I think really hard to go up against Israel. And Israel's got a little more going for it than Saudi Arabia as far as the culture.
For sure.
But the Saudi Arabia, like, I thought it was interesting in Blumenthal's book. I didn't know, but he talks about the 29 pages in the 9/11 report where they investigated the Saudi connection with 9/11, and that was all
redacted. Yeah.
Like, I want to read that section.
Yeah, the only pushback I'd give on Saudi Arabia is we don't fund them, they fund us. So I'm not sure that's they would be the next target.
But boom. But yeah.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah, I know. It's true.
Well, indirectly, what do you mean? There was like the arms deal that was negotiated with them, but I guess it's U.S. companies, or how does it work?
Well, and they fund a lot of, it seems that they fund a lot of the military operations that we want funded and things that we want done in the Middle East for us, right? The money comes from Saudi Arabia often. And they also are very big in Wall Street. Like a lot of LPs for venture funds and hedge funds, and like a lot of it is Saudi money. There's a lot of Saudi money floating around. So
what's an LP?
A limited partner. It's like someone who puts the money into a fund that then goes and invests in companies.
Can I bring up some trivial but weird point or a bit tidbit? One of my friends is in this book.
No way.
Yeah, on page 135. So among Bannon's significant hires was Breitbart was Julia Hahn, a hyper-ambitious online writer in her early 20s who hailed from the same affluent Southern California environment as Stephen Miller. Okay, Julia was part of my my gun school in Los Angeles. She was young. I think she was still in high school then, and super sweet girl and really bright and a good shot. And she was one of the instructors at the Girls Gun Club I was at. And I didn't even realize she had gone. I knew she went on to work for the Laura Ingraham show when I was in New York working on my SJW comedy show, Totally Biased. And she was working for the Laura Ingraham show. And then I lost touch with her. We didn't stay in touch. And I didn't know what, I didn't hear her name again until Trump was elected. And then I read a hit piece about my friend, about what a crazy white nationalist she was and all these ties and stuff. And then I read how she had left Laura Ingraham and gone to Breitbart and then, started working for the Trump administration. Anyway, I'm reading this book and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's my little friend again. I just know it's this sweet, but they try to paint her. That's where it's almost like in the documentary Hoaxed, where Cernovich interviews, what's her name, who did the Red Pill documentary?
Cassie J.
Cassie J. Yeah. And she explains how once she was targeted by the media for hit pieces and smears that tarnished her reputation and character, then she started to realize, hey, what if there's a lot of people who I believe things about that are not true? Because now I've seen it happen to me. And so now I need to go back and reinvestigate what I actually think about people. Like I just take at face value that so-and-so is this alt-right character or whatever. And how do I know? And anyway, that just reminded me of that because I'm reading about her and I'm like, to see someone that you know or used to know anyway, sort of just written up in kind of a third person as being this like shadowy figure who is sympathetic to white nationalism when I've never heard a single thing. There's nothing about her that would lead me to believe that that's true.
It's very
which is kinda weird.
dehumanizing.
Yeah, it is. And you never know. And it makes you wonder, like, once again, you know, how many preconceptions do I have about certain figures and about people that are just based on this big propaganda machine with goals and aims that are out, that just kind of views people as cogs, and as you know, even Blumenthal, I think, as aware as he is of the propaganda machine, he still buys into some of those things that they're selling. Like, I would never call Gavin McInnes a white nationalist, for example. I just never, and I looked into it because people told me he was, and I was going on his show once, and I was like, well, let me find out before I go on. And I didn't find anything to make me believe that's true at all. But, you know, he says it as if it's just a fact.
I think
it seems like he learned his little narrow world, and he doesn't believe the propaganda in his narrow world, but then he doesn't apply that anywhere else. He's like, oh, well, none of this war stuff is true because I understand how that propaganda works. But everything else, I'm just going to accept at face value. And he does that to the Draw Muhammad contest. He paints them as like, oh, well, they're pretending to care about free speech. My friend and someone who we interviewed won the Draw Muhammad contest that he references in this book, and I know exactly why he did it. It was about free speech. Like, they're angry that the Muslim community is saying you can't draw Muhammad, and he's like, that's why I draw Muhammad, because you say I can't. Like, it is all about free speech. But he paints it as like they're pretending it's about free speech. They're just Islamophobes. That's what it is. It's like, all right, well.
I think part of the problem, Carter, and to going back to what you're saying and maybe what Aline said, it's like he has this impression in his mind that that are bad. Right? You are a right wing, so you're a Islamophobe and you're a racist. No, I mean, he doesn't necessarily say racist in the book, but you know what I'm saying. So that sort of collective thought process that sometimes are ascribed to a group, and they say, oh, everybody is like that. If they're a part of that group, that's your characteristic too. And we, unfortunately, in the world we're today, we suffer that. I mean, there's so much of that happening, and that's the problem. They don't want to, you know, instead of looking at people based on what they do individually, we ascribe something to everybody, right? Oh, everybody's like that. If you're a Christian, oh, you're hate gays, which is obviously not true. But there's people who believe that, and it's such a big problem. Hopefully we can move away from that. And very true what you're saying. I mean, when he wrote the book, that's one of the things that was a little bit difficult to sort of follow in terms of believing what he's saying, is because he does bring a lot of facts in that when you read it and then you do your own research, you might say, well, that is true, that's true, that's true. But then he brings in all these little blurbs or burbs and things that he says that are like, okay, well, I don't know if I believe that's your opinion, but that's not necessarily that. I wouldn't say that's true. And like you said, in the case of the speech, Draw Muhammad thing. Oh, those people obviously are probably thinking they're racist, right? And it's because of, why do we have to ascribe on people and think everybody is bad? It's almost like there's some group of people that always interpret the intentions of others as evil or bad or something, instead of giving them the benefit of the doubt many times, or it's happening so much. So
yeah, generally I think you should take people, I don't know, when you meet someone or whatever, take them in good faith until they give you reason not to trust them anymore. And we just we don't do that anymore. We just automatically are like, oh, you're on that side, or therefore you're in bad faith, or you have secret beliefs that you never state that I know. I know you have those beliefs.
That's way more common than it used to be, right? I don't know where that came from, but Carrie, I don't feel like that's what it used to be like, but now it is like that. You have secret beliefs. Oh, you voted for Trump. You must have secret beliefs about blah, blah, blah.
You have secret beliefs you don't even know you have, but I know you have them.
Yes.
Yeah.
for me, it's like we're basing. There are so many people in power. There are people with certain agendas. They want to write a hit piece to get people to believe and sway public opinion in this way and that way. And it's like that affects our interpersonal relationships. Like that affects like how we see other people. And it's all based off of this assumption that everything that we all take in is correct. And it's often not. It's deliberate. It's deliberately manufactured, or it's skewed so heavily to one side. And it's like, if we're basing our own opinions off of information like that, and other people are doing that as well, and we're judging them based on that, like, then it's all just nonsense. To me, it's like you have to just kind of almost like assume baseline that nothing, just question. Question all the content that you see, but don't question people that you meet. When you meet people, give them the benefit of the doubt, but the information you're seeing, don't give that the benefit of the doubt. Be very critical of it, be very scrutinizing. I think that is like one of the only ways out of this, because I think at this point where like the way I see it is like, I find myself getting really angry. And then I'm like, where is this rage coming from? Like and I think we have a tendency to paint, someone that might disagree with us as the worst possible version of so if I vote for Trump, then I must secretly be some awful, the worst type of Trump supporter. Those secret beliefs, like someone, or assuming I have secret beliefs about something or whatever. And I think that comes from dishonest journalism in part. It's like, well, okay, like all the, like before, like in my life in the past, like the only examples I had of Trump supporters were bad, like the worst types of people. And so I thought, okay, well, Trump must be that way, and everyone who agrees with him must be that way. And it's like, I catch myself doing it now with Biden. I'm like, no, stop it. Like, I know that that's not that simple, like at all. And I think it's a combination of like our very like primal brain, like in the back, like our stupid monkey brains. And then that combined with like social media and journalism. And it's like, yeah, you can't, it's hard. It's hard to stop that.
Yeah.
What you're speaking of directly is scientifically proven. Our brains, yes, our brain.
We have to perpetually. Go ahead.
Manny, we couldn't hear you because you were a little delayed. But Bethany, what were you saying? And then maybe we can...
I was saying, you just brought up a terrific point, and it's scientifically based and backed, because we as humans, we go straight to looking for the threat, like through the millennia, and the human brain goes straight for looking for the threat. And so it's so much easier to look for, as a group, to look for the threat and the thing that you can fight against, rather than what we have in common. Like, we have our humanity in common. And so I think you just made a terrific point, and I want to bring that to light, where it's like, it's so much easier to be angry at someone when they're writing something, rather than when you're sitting face to face with a person and you get to know them and their story. And so I just really appreciate you saying that.
I worked the polls in Indiana, and we had to wear R's or D's on our shirt.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny. The D's were I'm an R. If that
they were what?
Apparent. I'm a Republican, an R. We had to wear our D's on our name tags so that we prove that we were non-biased. We could look at each other and say, oh yeah, whatever. Anyway, it was to be I think it was the first time that some of the D's had actually known that they were talking to a Republican.
That's awesome.
And like, there was a lady there who, very nice lady. She was a lesbian and a D, and she thought, with my R first impression, that I was going to attack her. and think her lifestyle is wrong. And we got to talking about her son and stuff he needed to do to become an engineer. And I was like, yeah, do this, this, and this. And it was funny, the like taken aback look she gave me, like, why are you helping me? You're an R. Yeah, So I think that this book, that's why I kept reading it, is because I don't want to be in my own little echo chamber, both mentally and socially. So I think this book was good, but I also think more people should be more social and talk to people who aren't necessarily their same thought processes and stuff.
Yeah. It's very hard to hate an idea when it's attached to a person who actually is quite lovely. And so that's a really beautiful story that you just told us.
I found that I read a lot of psychology books, and I've read like 5 or 6 on borderline personality disorder. And I find that a lot of the political culture right now operates on a lot of the same principles of a borderline personality disorder. Like, seeing hostility where there is none is like number one. Hello? And it's like, once you realize that that's what you're doing, and you can go, wait a minute, I don't have borderline personality disorder, you can move past it. But I think a lot of people don't realize that they're pushing themselves into that, because they're also their emotional responses are getting more and more intense, and they think that because everyone's after them, that anything that they do is justified, and obviously that's not true.
Well, also those emotional overreactions are now being nurtured. If you're triggered by the word Trump written in chalk on the sidewalk, you've got the woke left saying, oh, absolutely, he wants to round up all your gay and lesbian friends and put them in concentration camps. This fear that you feel is legitimate. How are you going to get over your mental illness when you're being told that your emotional overreactions that you should be in therapy for are something that you should cultivate because it's opening your eyes to the reality?
Yeah.
Jonathan Haidt talked about how the colleges are currently teaching the mentally ill mental patterns such as catastrophizing, projection, and it's actually covered in the universities of going, they're white, they're conservative, they're men, assume that they're sexist, assume the negative. If that anything is, we've got a more complex and diverse environment. When people trip up on social stuff, assume they want to hurt you. And they're teaching this. And it's the opposite of what you do to resolve paranoia, resolve anxiety, and teach resiliency.
Microaggressions is a great example of that. That is legitimately straight seeing hostility where there is none. That's all that is. And you're assuming intent of everyone around you. And that's insane. That's literally crazy. And they keep pushing it. And it's like, it's not helping anyone. It's hurting. It's destroying families, relationships, friendships. It's destroying so much. And it really is, it's destructive.
I think another to your point, Alex, about it being a lot like BPD, there's something that is the whole splitting phenomenon where you put everybody in either good or evil groups is something that BPD people.
What is BPD?
Borderline personality disorder.
Thank you. Okay.
And so that's a term they use to say when you tend to look at everyone and everything as either good or evil.
And you'll flip the other person, you'll flip a single person when they do something. Like, they'll be perfect and then an angel, and then they do one thing and they're a demon.
Right. Like monster. I could see that happening with, let's say there's someone who you're friends with, and then you find out they voted a way you didn't like, and suddenly they're in the evil box. I didn't realize they were evil, right? Like it's kind of how I think you're onto something, though. I think that somebody in the chat even said, I finally poked over to chat. This has been such an engrossing discussion. I haven't been able to look in there much, but somebody said you were right on, and that we sort of maybe have a collective borderline personality disorder going on in this country. They also said that the book club group is becoming a hat club. it is. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
There's only 2 hats.
Yeah.
there's 3. Keith's got a hat.
Sorry,
But
Keith.
say yeah, don't leave the guys out. Guys can wear hats. Oh, here we go. Now 4. You know, I was just gonna. I definitely agree with. You know, I think Tamara was the one that brought up the Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff book, where he talks specifically about how we are actually making psychological problems worse rather than doing the things that you would need to do to overcome psychological problems. Also, though, I mean, just if I just introspect a little bit, I mean, we know humans are evolutionarily tribal. Like, we didn't evolve to have huge networks of people and know a lot of people and be exposed to that many different viewpoints. I mean, we're like 100, like what, 120 people or something. Like, we evolved to have very small networks of people, and we are inherently tribal. That doesn't make it right, but we do have inherent tribal tendencies. And, you know, to be honest, it can be difficult sometimes when you have a context of knowledge that's so divergent from someone else's context of knowledge, and you meet them. You know, when you're in a tribe, your context of knowledge overlap very closely with everyone around you. So if someone in your tribe has a wildly divergent belief about something, there's something wrong with them, and there's an initial reaction that, like, they must be from another tribe, something's wrong with this person, like they're crazy, when in fact they may just have a completely different content of knowledge. And I think we have, you know, Carrie, you've talked about this before, and Scott Adams talks about it. There's multiple movies playing at the same time, and people reading completely different sources of information. And so when you run across someone and they make a claim or say something that seems so outlandish, it seems that way because your context of knowledge, that is a ridiculous thing to say, but their context of knowledge almost doesn't overlap at all with yours. And I find it actually quite difficult personally, and this is my own psychological problems maybe, but I find it quite difficult to, like, take a deep breath and take them for real and actually have a conversation at that point. My tendency is just to dismiss them and be like, I don't want to talk to you. You're crazy. You're out there. You're like, you're not someone that I can learn anything from. I want to go away. And I have to really check myself and be like, okay, let's talk about, like, let's engage on some level of commonality somewhere to see where we diverge. I think that's actually hard. I don't think that's an easy thing to do. Maybe it's easy for everyone else, but it's not easy for me. I don't know.
I think your reaction is very human reaction.
Yeah, there's like 2 sides to every coin, right? So what you're saying, Carter. So we all come to things or come to ideas or thoughts based on how we perceive it from our side. So thinking about what you're saying, a good thing about the book, if you were not necessarily seeing things like Max Blumenthal was presenting them, it sort of opened your eyes to a different perspective on certain things. Some ideas that we might have, like, hey, you know, like going back to the time of the Iraq War, you might have been somebody, I was probably, if you asked me back then, like, are you for the war in Iraq? I would have said yes, based on what I knew back then. But I didn't know, sorry, there's some craziness happening at the house. But yeah, so, you know, and so opening our minds to see the other perspectives that sometimes we don't see, because in the world we live in today, we're so sort of like being driven around, or just focusing, or just in our own little echo chamber, and not seeing the other perspective, because I think the majority of people are good people. And obviously we can see things from our side very easily. Sometimes not as easy to see the perspective of another person, but there's a reason why that other person thinks the way they do. So if we're able to sort of look at things, now after that, you can probably have a better idea of where you fall, or maybe believe better than that what you believe is the right way, or you might be pulled a little more to the other side. You know, so in that book, I didn't agree with everything he said, and I didn't view everything in the same way as he did. But in that respect, I did like it because it gave me maybe a view that I haven't seen per se all together, right? So I think in that respect, it was a good thing. And I did like at the end that he seemed to be a little more reasonable in his opinions of what's been happening over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Not like some people are saying, like, oh, it's all, 95% of what you hear about the current president is bad, and no sort of credit for anything good that's happened over the last 4 years. It's almost like, well, my thought is that right now, when you have an outsider coming into a government, the government, people who are living the working government work there forever most of the time. There's like their job, like that's their career. And when they have an outsider coming in who's going to break up the status quo, nobody wants that. And they all just fight. They're doing everything they can do to get that outsider out. And that's what's been happening in my view over the last 4 years. And
I think
and
also
world,
money they want to keep. Yeah, I think they want to keep us also fighting on this increasingly meaningless RD, dichotomy that Cheeky Mayor talked about. As long as they can keep us, hey, it's so important if you're Republican or Democrat. And hey, I wanted to ask Michael. We haven't heard much from you. Was there anything that you wanted to say about the book, or no? You don't have to.
No, it's thank you, Carrie. I found it, a really good book. I really appreciate everybody's comments, and I think that there's a lot of good facts and information in it. It was a little hard for me to get past a couple of things. First of all, Max Blumenthal's history with Russia Today and Sputnik TV. So he's, from my perspective, he is on the payroll of another country.
Wait, what is his history? I don't know what that is. Can you?
Yeah, so he is a journalist, and sorry for the scare quotes, for RT, which is Russia Today, and just I love history, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but kind of reading it in that light, it almost to me looked like there was sort of like an editorial involvement by the foreign ministry of Russia. There really is nothing, if you're looking at it from a Russian perspective. So why would you? It's not particularly, that's not the topic. It's very isolated. But, Foreign Minister Lavrov comes into Syria and just, puts everything back together. We start history in the book in Afghanistan after the Soviet invasion. So another problem of mine is just, there is no history before Zygmunt Brzezinski is in the Carter administration. So, there was a whole canvas here in this part of the country, painted, repainted before anybody ever got there. So, but what's been said so far, there's just a lot of moving pieces. So that's important to know. But I just kind of noticed, in many places he brings Russian topics in. The invasion of the breakup of Yugoslavia, sort of negatively portraying the Western involvement with that. I'm not saying it wasn't negative, but very kind of pro-Serbia in my read. Very negative toward the Eastern expansion of NATO. Whether that's good or not, kind of a negative on Hungary, negative on the perceived fears of countries in the Balkans like Estonia of potential Russian threats. That doesn't really hit you over the head with it, but I see that perspective. It would have been helpful to me to have that more warning. I do work for Russia Today.
Yeah, I'm looking at. He should have said this in the introduction. And actually, the sad thing about what you just told me is now I can see why the left that reads this will dismiss his Russiagate stuff and the afterward as well. You're a Russian plant, and you didn't even say in the book. You didn't come out and say you're paid.
And in fact, he could have said it. Remember, somewhere in the first third of the book where he talks about how they were going after any media that was that was sort of a resistor against the Iraq War, like Phil Donahue got canned, right? And then
he mentioned RT,
and he mentions RT. He says RT was targeted, basically called a foreign asset. He could have said, by the way, I work for them.
Yeah, normally if you write an article about buying stock or the performance of Apple stock, you have to disclose I'm a shareholder of Apple. It seems like if you're going to write an entire book about this where Russia is one of the central figures, you might want to say my employment comes from, I'm looking at his Wikipedia page now, Sputnik and RT. Okay, that might matter. I'm not saying I'm not using the genetic fallacy, but you still need to say it.
Exactly. And especially in today's world, we've gone through 4 years of Russia, kind of laying this out. These are all great facts. This is very interesting. Oh, by the way.
Yeah.
I did notice that in the a book, he almost never talks about Russia supplying weapons to these groups. And they do, I don't know if it's as much as the US, but they certainly do a lot of it. And he never mentions that. I thought that was interesting, and I didn't know why. You might have just explained why. And
Wait, are you sure?
Supply to
I don't know about
side?
that. I don't know if I believe you when you say that. I think he might have mentioned that in Syria, Russia was involved in with some of the other.
I thought in Syria, did he mention in Syria how Russia was going up against ISIS? Like Russia was helping the Syrian government kick ISIS out of Syria. Isn't that what he said? But
yeah,
I think so. I think
of course, a long history of the Assad family and Russia, the Soviet Union before that. So certainly they have an interest in this.
I think they have a risk. I mean, there's some reason the AK-47 is the most popular and widely distributed rifle in the world, right? Like Russia's been
it's not the US
sending guns around. And maybe another thing just occurred to me, maybe the reason he knows all this stuff is because he works for Russia.
Well, I mean, but I'm just his Wikipedia page, just to be clear. It says he's a regular contributor to Sputnik and RT, but formerly also a writer for The Nation, Alternet, The Daily Beast, Al Akbar, Media Matters for America. He's contributed to Al Jazeera English, The New York Times, and Los Angeles Times. So he's kind of all over the place.
That's right.
I did get the sense from the book, though, that he was. I got out of the. I mean, maybe I already knew this, so it's hard to tell, but I got out of the book he wasn't hiding that Russia supported Assad, that Russia was propping up the government in Afghanistan and supplying. Like, that was to me, that was very clear. I don't remember him talking too much about Russia and Iraq or Russia and Libya, but maybe.
Well, Russia had a direct involvement in Syria. They have a naval base on the Mediterranean with Syrian permission, and that is their direct access to the Mediterranean and the European market, aside from sending stuff through the Black Sea, through the Bosphorus or Turkey into the Mediterranean. And they've had that military base for years. When they said, let's go in and attack Syria, I was working for a defense contractor and they went, this is stupid. You're going to get Russia involved. They don't care about you overturning Iraq, but Syria is their ally, not just as a, hey, we like you, but this controls the oil exports aside from the Gazprom pipelines that go through Ukraine and on through Eastern Europe.
Syria is their Gulf access, is what you're saying.
Yes, Mediterranean.
Oh, yeah.
I agree. It is dangerous to mess with Syria. That's a direct confrontation with Russia. And Russia was a large part of helping the Syrian government kick ISIS out, more than the United States.
And Tamara asks in chat, isn't Al Jazeera funded by Qatar? I think they are. I mean, I didn't look it up. I guess I could quickly, but yeah, I'm pretty sure Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar.
Well, I just want to say, Carter, now that we've given some criticism, but also some praise to this book, where Deck's probably going to be called a Russia propaganda outlet.
I should bring the big Russia hat. I need one of those big furry hats. Can I just I just want to say something about we were talking about how it's difficult to, like, when you divide people into, like, this, they're not in my tribe, and so therefore it's difficult to kind of relate to them. There's a flip side to that I see through this tribalism, which is they are in my tribe, therefore they get no criticism. And to me, that's just as dangerous and just as prevalent. that's how a lot of these people get away with a lot of the stuff they do, because they've been labeled your tribe. And so once they're in your tribe, you don't criticize anything they do. And frankly, Obama is a great example to me of a lot of stuff that he did that should have been criticized, but wasn't, because he was in the tribe and he was labeled one of the good guys. So, we just don't talk about Drone Tuesdays or whatever it was.
There's a lot. He uses a lot of groupthink, and that may help. That there's things in here that annoy people if they're in the group. I would think the deep state people, like people that work for the CIA, will hate this book. And
definitely.
I'm an atheist, so the Christian part, I noticed it, but it didn't bother me. I didn't vote for Trump either time, so him going after Trump didn't bother me either. The thing that got me the worst was when he talked about the evil and toxic libertarian / neocon actions in Afghanistan. I was like walking in the woods, listening, you start yelling, "There's no such thing."
Yeah, I was surprised. I'm like, does he know what the word libertarian means? What is he talking about? He just threw the word out there. Like, yeah, that was a weird one.
No. That was like Michael said at the beginning. He should have defined his terms.
He doesn't. I don't think he knows what Islamophobia means either. He's like playing an index card of what that means.
He at least positively cites a libertarian or libertarian-ish Rand Paul in Rand Paul's objection to the constitutionality of our actions in Libya or Syria. I forget.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember that. I did note that he said something nice about Rand Paul. That's nice, I guess.
But I'm not sure he kind of connected the libertarian to anything. But
is Tulsi Gabbard libertarian, by the way?
No.
I mean, she's a Democrat, but
she's definitely not libertarian. She's far from libertarian.
No, not at all.
Economically, she just is against war, but that doesn't make her libertarian. It takes more than that.
Although it does seem like being against war automatically makes you on the wrong side of everyone in the Beltway.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might call her a libertarian because she's against war, but she wants to take all that $1 trillion and spend it on social programs. Like, that's not libertarian.
Right.
Even though I would take her over Biden any day, Carrie.
Yeah, me too. Hey, I wanted to bring up one other just, quibble I have with something I think of as his blind spot is, again, sometimes you may not like the person saying something, but it doesn't mean that what they're saying is false. And on page 134 of my book, where he's talking about how these right-wingers started to use the phrase cultural Marxism. And it's interesting to me because when I was first coming out of social justice ideology and I was trying to find a way to describe it, I used the term cultural Marxism in my first essay, and I was told, "Oh, you can't use that word. That's a right-wing talking point. That's not a real thing." And I was like, I was just trying to describe it the best way I could. I've since just started calling it social justice Marxism. I think that more accurately gets to the heart of it anyway. But he talks about cultural Marxism, and he says, Lynn's documentary on political correctness charted the origins of cultural Marxism back to a collection of mostly Jewish socialist intellectuals who fled Nazi Germany following Hitler's rise to power. Calling themselves the Frankfurt School, these academics brought to American shores the vehicle that translated Marxism from economic to cultural terms, giving us what we now know as political correctness, a cultural revolution against Western society, Lynn said. The Frankfurt Group's landmark studies of authoritarianism in America encouraged the standard bearers of political correctness to label their opponents as fascists and to subject them to psychological therapy in the form of sensitivity training, Lynn's documentary alleged. Amid the 1960s counterculture, they provided the inspiration for the birth of critical theory, the postmodern academic trend that took the form of courses in gender studies, Black studies, and gay studies. Lind and his collection of talking heads, including the radical leftist turned far-right provocateur David Horowitz, posited this development as nothing short of an anti-American plot. Okay, so those two paragraphs, I'm reading that, and in the margins I'm writing, but all of this is true.
Yeah. Yeah, 100% true. I remember reading that going like, why are you saying alleged? Like, did you not? It's very easy to go read about the Frankfurt School and what they said. Like, he did no work there at all. He just assumed that because they said it, it was wrong.
I was shouting it. I was shouting, "This is true. This is true." As the audiobook is playing, I'm like, "Shut! You're wrong. It's true."
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you noticed the ad hominem he does also. I think it's on page. Yeah, it's in my book. It's on page 133, but it's the same section, Carrie. He calls the people that liked Breitbart an army of beta males. And it's like, what is that ad hominem? He just throws it out there. Like, oh, obviously this is an army of beta males, beta male underlings. And he also made this comment about they blamed cultural Marxism instead of Wall Street greed for the financial collapse. It's like, well, like that's a weird assumption that Wall Street greed is the only thing that was responsible for the financial collapse. Like, I've read extensively about the financial collapse. Wall Street greed is a childish characterization of what the hell the collapse was. Like, it's moronic and childish way to criticize. I mean, was there greed on Wall Street? Yes, but like it's such a weird. Like, this is the talking point that he's taken a talking point from mainstream, done zero research on it, and then anything that might counter that talking point, he dismisses it and uses ad hominems against it. That section pissed me off a lot. Thank you for reminding me.
That beta male thing totally like made me go, anything he puts down for an opinion, I can't trust, because the beta and alpha stuff is based on debunked science about wolves. The scientist who put it forward debunked it himself. That's why, like, every time people bring up beta and alpha males, I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Can you send me? I would like to learn more about this. Can you send me any kind of references about alpha and beta males, alpha beta male stuff?
Yeah, the scientist who put it forward and debunked it has a website that he has a link to the original theory that he came up with, and then he shows how he debunked it. I
think it turned out that it was only true in captivity, and that in the wild, the hierarchy wasn't anything like what he had observed. So he had made all these observations about how wolves behaved and assumed.
What is his name? What is his name? I don't remember. Because there's lots of research about alpha and beta in primates too, not just wolves.
Right.
So I'm curious about.
Plus, my dog's not going to like hearing he's not the alpha.
Right, dogs. I mean,
no, I don't think we're saying there's no hierarchy, but I think she's just.
I know, I'm kidding.
To me, the problem wasn't necessarily that it was citing bad wolf research. It was just like it's a derogatory, it's an ad hominem attack to just throw out at people, and not justified by anything that he actually wrote. That pissed me off.
The whole book could have been made. The whole book could be made better. Like, I'd like to make an edit pass and go through it and remove every single adjective related to a person and just leave all the rest and take out all his conclusions. It'd be a much better book.
It would be a better book, yeah.
I caught grammar mistakes and it drove me crazy. There was one I'm a copy editor by trade, so there was like a typo. It was like period T, and I was like,
I saw that too. That bothered me.
It drove me crazy. I was like, you lost, like, every time I saw something like that, I'm like, you lost like a little bit of credibility with me, but that's my bias.
So I think we've gone over 2 hours, so we should probably wrap up soon. Does anybody have any closing thoughts that they want to
Let me just tell Yuval, David Mech, Mech, I think is the researcher who did all the wolf stuff.
Thank you.
So you can look that up.
Thank you very much.
And why would beta male be an insult when masculinity is toxic? Therefore, you want all males to be betas
That's
anyway.
a great point.
Right, good point.
That's hilarious, Christina. Any final parting comments? I'm so happy that all of you showed up today. I was wondering if this might be a 2-person thing. I was like, I don't know who read this, who stuck in for this one, but
you know what? I actually thought I just got finished reading another book that was like super detail oriented like this, where the timeline was actually more convoluted. And I think those kind of books are written for people who already understand the timeline and you're filling in details. So this wasn't as horrible timeline wise for me as maybe I had already been predisposed to deal with that, but I didn't think it was a bad book. I would still recommend the book to many people. I would probably throw the caveat in that he's extremely biased in certain ways, but his facts about the Middle East seem to be true from what I can tell, and it's good information to know if you don't really understand what's been going on in the Middle East for the past 50 years and the U.S.'s involvement.
So
I ended up
Carter,
making
I
my
would
own
say
timeline.
I would say read the book, but only as part of a book club.
Yes, this
I like
book
that.
club.
This book club.
A fabulous hat, Aline, by the way. I like it.
I think the book itself proves the point of why it's so important in this day and age that we just cannot just believe what we're told from whoever, expert, news media, whatever. We might hear the messages, but we still have to do our own fact checking and our own analysis, because we're being sold on something from all sides all the time.
Yeah.
I've told my grandchildren that if you see anything on the mainstream news any less straightforward than there was a plane crash in Duluth that killed 15 people, you have to look at it with a jaded eye and try to get to the truth.
Well, nowadays it will be there was a plane crash in Duluth and 15 people died of COVID. But I do agree with Carrie, though, that I think if you recommend this book to someone on the left, it could actually have a positive outcome, because if they already have Trump derangement syndrome, they'll gloss over all the stuff that pisses most people off, and they'll get to the end, and maybe they'll take some of the Russian collusion stuff seriously and the Clinton email stuff. So yeah, there's something good.
You're making me want to read the whole way through to the end, Carter.
The afterward is
read the last
the
two
best part,
chapters.
Christina.
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
It'll be worth it,
Spoiler
Christina.
alert. Trump is a buffoon. You'll get that in the afterword.
yeah. But I still think the afterward's the best part. But that's just because, I'm sick of hearing all the Marussia and all that kind of crap. And I was impressed that a leftist went over that stuff. So.
I didn't think that he was making the case that Trump was just a buffoon. He also said things like Trump resisted when all the heads of staff were pushing for war. At some points, Trump was like, no, I don't want to do this. So he did say things like that. He wasn't just throwing Trump under the bus.
That's true. And on page 245, he actually, maybe he's mistakenly defended Trump, but he did say that after Trump had a quote, fundamentally accurate assessment, CNN then spun it to make it, sound ridiculous and whatever. So he did credit Trump with kind of intuitively having an accurate assessment of what was going on. But the picture that I got was Trump was a buffoon who intuitively, and a racist who intuitively understood what was going on, but kind of at the end got overrun by his cabinet, and that was the end.
See, I think again that would go a long way to someone who's on the left who does hate Trump from an emotional place and who believes a lot of the lies. I think this book would go a long way to opening their mind just a crack, with something like that, where even they're reading it, they feel comfortable with him because he also he doesn't like Trump, but then he gives facts like that every once in a while, and you're like, oh. How else are they going to get that fact and consider where it's coming from? If it's coming from a Trump supporter, they're going to dismiss it. But if it's coming from him, they might be more inclined to question that and say, is that true? Like, did this happen? Is it true that Russiagate's not real?
Right. I guess it's maybe time to wrap it up. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you so much.
It was great conversation. Really, really appreciate it. What's the next book is Moon is a Harsh Mistress on December something. I don't remember.
It's your favorite.
I know. I don't remember the date of book club, but it's December something. Moon is a Harsh Mistress.
We'll plug it.
That's what we'll do. So thank you all for joining, and we will see everyone next time. Thanks for everyone in chat for joining book club, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. For your protection, the following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and marked for cancellation. Please report any sightings to Jack Dorsey. Did you know that 99.8% of election officials agree that election officials are innocent of any wrongdoing? If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Here's a fun fact, farm animals and prisoners are not permitted privacy. On a completely unrelated topic, the Deep State thanks you for sharing your colorful browser history. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.